Hi, so my name's Tom Kissock. I'm a second year PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And first and foremost, I need to acknowledge the Tupinamba land here in Rio de Janeiro, where I'm currently recording this video. And I would also like to acknowledge the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk and Menominee territories in the US where the conference is being organised. And I would also like to thank the conference organisers and extend my gratitude to them today for allowing me to record this presentation for you today, because I'm currently conducting some field work and not sure if I can guarantee my internet connection, a strong enough internet connection on the days of the conference. So my presentation today is entitled Indigenous Live Streaming in Brazil, a methodological case for reflective distant witnessing. What this paper really explores is how Indigenous activists in Brazil are live streaming on Instagram to advocate for land, citizenship and environmental rights in real time. And I suppose it's an extension of my PhD, kind of exploring how this knowledge is disseminated and translated to distant others, with a specific focus on us as researchers, right? And so I'm going to focus on one live stream by the Honeycoin community, showing an essential food distribution program taking place. And what this video kind of portrays is both an epistemological insights and also riffs in terms of the information and subsequent knowledge that can be gained from witnessing live streams. And I suppose what I'm arguing is that Indigenous streaming isn't a positive affordance, obviously, but I'm cautioning about the importance of researchers remaining reflexive to the medium. So, just to kind of summarise the political situation here in Brazil, the situation of Brazilian indigenous land rights reached a low point with the previous president Jair Bolsonaro in office. His government implemented various kind of neocolonial policies. However, Indigenous communities turned to social media as a weapon to kind of amplify their struggles, do things like discuss the climate, highlight charitable and community initiatives, for example. And over the last decade, a kind of surge of Indigenous video activism has enabled communities in Brazil to mobilise to various degrees, to do things like protest mining projects, congressional bills, and agricultural lobbies, right? And now this has kind of crossed over into Brazil's national politics, with 2022 having the largest number of Indigenous political candidates being voted into office. And their preferred method of communication was live streaming. For example, we had Sonia Guajajara that was voted in as a federal deputy and is now heading up the Indigenous ministry in Brazil, and also Celia Chacribaia, who was also elected for the state of Minas Gerais. And what they essentially did was use live streaming to turn audience followers of their live streams kind of into voters, right? And this is, again, there's a history of Indigenous politicians in Brazil adopting technologies to kind of amplify their voices. This isn't a kind of recent phenomenon. The first Indigenous Brazilian politician to be voted into Congress, Mario Joana, for example, famously used a tape deck to record other politicians' kind of racist discussions about Indigenous Brazilians. And I suppose this kind of racism and criminalisation has long been directed at Indigenous groups in Brazil. But as I said, however, now we kind of have the technology as a weapon to provide evidence of these kind of abuses taking place in real time. And I suppose that here I would like to kind of emerge and focus on one specific aspect of that, where the artist and activist Y, I've synonymised her name to kind of protect her identity, streamed her local community food distribution program, the SOS Povo Honeycoin, over her Instagram account. Now, the live stream was kind of thematic of her holding up a mirror to shine a light on Bolsonaro's government's failings to provide adequate services in the Brazilian state of Acre during the pandemic. Yet, more importantly, it displayed how live streaming can kind of challenge the notions of Brazilian citizenship by showing how communities can kind of independently organise distribution programs and then kind of market them via via live streams, or at least so I originally thought so I originally theorised as a kind of distant researcher to that, distant witness to that. So, to provide some context of the Hunikoing community, they reside in the western Brazilian Amazon in the state of Acre on the Peruvian border, in a region known as the Caxanaya. And this, their remoteness of some of the Hunikoing communities can sometimes mean that they're more susceptible to the elements of kind of Mother Nature, right? And the Hunikoing previously experienced intense flooding, and that meant it was extremely difficult to receive outside services such as food and medical supplies. Now, therefore, Y and her friend decided to live stream about the situation, and they showed their social media audience about the damage and destruction which had taken place along the River Jordan. Y's friend shows us a house that's almost kind of completely submerged by floodwater in one of these live streams. And throughout the video, we also see local members of the community queuing outside one various home, where there are about 3 men distributing flour and rice to people and then ticking their names off a list. And the whole time, Y is narrating over the live stream, explaining the SOS Povo Hunikoing project and how, as a community, they're organising the food distribution programme. Now, contextually, the video portrayed how Bolsonaro's government had failed to provide any adequate services whilst he was in office, and also defunded vital ministries and institutions that provide these services. Now, during the live stream, Y tells the audience how to donate to receive Cesta Básicas, which are kind of similar to a care package, right? And she also states that she wants the community's voice to be heard by the outside world. Now, so then it comes, how do we listen to those voices, right? So here comes in the kind of investigation into how knowledge is transferred through live stream videos, with an emphasis on kind of video data analysis and kind of autoethnography for us as researchers that shouldn't constrain itself to notions of kind of virtual, online, or digital ethnography. I mean, as a lot of people argue, ethnography now encircles both the digital and physical field sites, with the kind of rapid expansion into young network publics, and is somewhat totalising between these environments. And basically, the COVID-19 pandemic also pushed us as researchers to discover and explore more innovative methods of conducting studies, which both led to kind of custom-made video and ready-made video live stream research projects. I suppose I'm arguing that kind of qualitative autoethnography as distant witnesses is kind of a suitable method to examine live streams as kind of digital artifacts, because kind of critical self-reflection conclusions can be drawn from these online interactions and allow us to kind of contemplate what knowledge was disseminated during us acting as witnesses. But I also acknowledge that ethnography isn't reinventing the wheel, right? It's been used extensively in the research on kind of video activism. So therefore, it's kind of important to incorporate this kind of critical autoethnography of online witnessing that refers to how we should be reflective researchers from a kind of ontological different environment. So for example, I'm a Western male from an urban setting rather than a Indigenous female activist from the Western Brazilian Amazon, right? And it's vital for that purpose for us kind of decolonising solidarity as well when kind of researching Indigenous causes, to kind of also turn the lens on ourselves, as Claire Land has discussed at length in her book kind of Decolonising Solidarity, in which she argues that non-Indigenous activists and researchers such as herself kind of must participate in Indigenous solidarity and research from a self-critical stance, which is kind of especially true as an autoethnographer who isn't on the ground with the research participants, which can lead to kind of epistemological conundrums such as being there. Therefore, autoethnographic live reflection and note-taking allows a non-Indigenous researcher to kind of critically reflect and engage from a distance surrounding kind of introspective questions such as where did I witness the live stream and what was I doing before the live stream? How did the live stream make me feel, for example? So I suppose here I'd like to just get to like how this can work in practice. Now, after adopting a kind of iterative research process of identifying the social media accounts and building a case around them and setting up notifications on the platforms to build a pattern of when various individuals and streamers sort of tend to go live, there are two different methods for conducting research on live streams from what I'm finding in my PhD. And I suppose one can adopt specific research hours for witnessing live streams in a kind of comfortable workspace with a computer or a phone ready to capture the stream via a kind of screen recorder with prior consent from the participants and then take notes, right? However, for kind of live explorative Indigenous research conducted by a non-Indigenous person, this method can kind of maybe set out an asymmetrical power dynamic between the researcher and the participant. For example, it might lead to kind of making value judgments by predetermining the parameters of which said research will take place. And instead, here I'd like to argue that it should be a duty of a non-Indigenous researcher to take a more all-encompassing stance to witnessing live streams as soon as they go live, regardless of the distance and the physical setting. And this can kind of equilibralise the terms of witnessing and the research engagement towards Indigenous communities by placing the kind of power solely in the streamer's hands by allowing them to decide upon the research terms of engagement. And thus situates the researcher as somewhat secondary, because kind of too often researchers have tried to dictate the terms of engagement within research participants within Indigenous communities. Yet the study of live streaming, if implemented like so, can kind of turn this power dynamic on its head because of the technology's kind of spontaneity and ephemerality as well. Yet the research also needs to keep that mental health in check. Obviously, that's an important point to also mention. But I suppose this speaks more broadly again to Land's argument surrounding the practice of kind of decolonising solidarity, and I suppose us reflecting on some of our comfortable privileges that we may have as researchers experiencing when we're able to reflect on how Indigenous data is transmitted via live streams. So, even though we're reflecting on these live streams, it's also important to mention that considering the discussion about live stream research, regardless of the methodology, we can always get thrown off track as distant witnesses and researchers, right? And this is because not all the information comes out in what we initially see in live streams, right? Now, fortunately, the live stream I mentioned here, Y had turned on her on-demand settings on Instagram, and I was able to revisit and reflect on the content at a later period. Now, initially, when I watched the stream in real time, I theorised that the Hunikawing were contesting their citizenship through communal organisation. However, this wasn't the case. Exactly the case. I mean, when Y turned panned the camera around on the initial stream, the video for me dropped out for a matter of seconds. And this camera pan turned out to be very important because it showed a banner advertising the Fundação Brasileiros pelo Brasil programme. Now, in short, this programme is committed to distributing food and goods to rural Brazilians and was set up by the Bank of Brazil, which is controlled by the Brazilian government. Now, this wasn't mentioned again during the live stream. What was mentioned was the SOS Povo Hunikawing programme, that's a charity organisation outside that of the Brazilian state, which led me to ascertain that it was solely a self-funded programme and therefore could be understood as the Hunikawing contesting kind of citizenship against the Brazilian state and instead inserting a cultural identity, perhaps as the Hunikawing nation territory. Whilst synchronically watching the video, I assumed it also showed how Bolsonaro systematically defunded agencies that were supposed to help with these distribution programs to the point of inoperacy, which is true. But after observing the Fundação sign on the on-demand video no longer makes sense within the context of this specific live stream. Now, ultimately, this poses questions about how we should be witnessing live streams and the information that can be disseminated by them. And it also raises important ethical research questions about researcher biases and the kinds of sources we decide to triangulate live streams with. Now, I suppose to wrap this up, the more and more people get connected to the internet day by day, and live streams are still susceptible to data packet loss, i.e. video and audio drop-off, and therefore can fragment important information. And this is both both happens on the side of the, say, an Indigenous first order witness streamer, possibly in a remote location, and maybe a second order witness researcher in a city where kind of Wi-Fi can also drop, or 4 or 5G signals can be disrupted, right? Now, if research participants have allowed for their on-demand settings to be turned on at their account levels, for example, videos may stay available on these platforms and function like kind of output captures and not local recordings, i.e. that if there's a loss of bandwidth, for example. Now, it was only on a second observation for me, I managed to see the fond de some sign for around 4 or 5 frames. And I was then able to kind of reevaluate my empirical parameters of this. And I suppose our research into live streamed Indigenous rights should be understood as witnessing in this respect, as it allows for practice researchers to provide testimony as a form of solidarity. It's an ethical responsibility to also articulate. As researchers, we're kind of sharing space with Indigenous causes like the Hoodie Queens and showing solidarity by researching their territories if we're researching that through live streams. And I suppose in some instances, Smith reminds us that our only impact could be transferring knowledge within kind of academic circles. However, we all have a responsibility to provide testimony in some capacity as a knowledge transfer, whether that's in the format of a policy paper, a lecture, a book chapter, which is the basis of this paper today, which I have the details for here, or a conference presentation. However, we should always be careful when providing these knowledge transfers in the form of live streams, right? Because the information may be misinterpreted if our connection drops. So I suppose on that note, I would like to thank the organisers of the conference, for allowing me to pre-record this video for you all today, and let's hope the connection stays strong throughout the conference. Thank you ever so much. Here's my details. If you'd like to get in touch, my email, my Twitter, I would love to hear from you and connect with all of you. And once again, I'm so sorry I couldn't be live with you there. Thank you ever so much. Thanks.